advice at the time that my degree would go stale unless I did something, and the point of doing something thereafter was to stop it from going stale. But now I'm in the position where my degree won't ever go stale, and it was back in the day when Chris Monk was around, and I was very close to him. It dawned on me that there might be an angle in there might be an overlap between law and flat Earth. And I had my eye on a couple of courses from a couple of institutions that had caught my eye, and it was more like a fantasy at the time. It was just like an idealistic like perspective of whether or not I could overlap flat Earth into law, and if I could, would it be worth risking it? Because it's a bit dodgy to try and argue the Earth's flat in a law context, because like everything's against you. But time went by, and I ran it by Nathan Oakley at the time, and both Chris and Nathan were both really positive, and I was positive. But lots of things has happened in the meantime, and I got distracted and forgot about it. Anyway, the academic year started up in England 2-3 weeks ago, and I just thought I'd have a look online to see when the deadline was, because it's probably passed. And I thought, if it's passed, then I've missed out. Maybe next year, you know what I mean? Anyway, I was checking on the Saturday, or it might have been the Sunday, and it turns out that the deadline for one of the courses that I was interested in had just passed on the Friday before, day or two before. So I rings them up first thing Monday morning, and I just said, look, if I get my form in today, could I in theory get on this course? Is it too late? And the lady says, no, you'll have to do it pretty quick. And I said, okay. So I applied for it anyway, just to see whether or not it would be rejected. And basically, the gist of it is, I'm one of a few people in England that has an undergraduate degree in law, and then a postgraduate diploma in legal practice. And what that allows me to do now is further my studies to do a particular course that I've found that I quite like the look of. And it actively encourages me to critically analyse the current thinking of a topic of my choice. Now, when somebody gives you that description as to be able to critically analyse current thinking on a topic of my choice, that's kind of like perfect for flat earthness, because although I'm not proposing that I'm going to argue that the Earth's flat, I absolutely can argue legally that they can't prove that the Earth's a sphere, because I don't necessarily think that the Earth is actually flat. It does present itself as flat, but there could be like fourth or fifth dimensional stuff that we're just not able to work out. So for me, it doesn't necessarily default back to flat, but it does appear to be flat. And I'm happy to argue that, it does seem to be flat. I'm all right with that. But really, we're never really going to be able to prove it over the whole plane, because we haven't got any, like, there's no science for a flat Earth. We don't have scientists. We definitely don't have $50 million a day. The most we've realistically got is like a P900 and a compass. That's about as much as what any of us have got. But we're expected to come up with models, and we're expected to be able to make predictions and all this stuff, and we have nothing. So one of the main criticisms that flat earthers get is that we don't have any peer-reviewed documents to support our version that we might not live on a sphere. And it's true. There is no science for a flat earth. There's no science, there's no scientists, there's no money, there's no nothing. We're just a group, a little small niche corner of the internet, and the community spirit is fantastic because we're all friends. We all know each other, generally speaking. But I'm in the position where I can do this particular course that encourages critical thinking, and I can overlap it with law with regards to flat Earth. And what I'm thinking of doing is putting together a dissertation, and basically get peer review documentation that's gone through one of the best legal or one of the best educational systems in the world, or it's regarded as, at least, that these guys can't prove their claims, but we're all taught it from a very early age. Now, in the UK, we have something called the national curriculum, and it goes in 4 stages. You've got like, I think it's called Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, 3, and 4. And as you age, you go into different key stages, and the solar system gets taught from a very, very early age. We all know that we're all impressionable when we're young. And I was looking at the syllabus for the solar system in the GCSE boundary, like the national curriculum for what we all get taught. And I was only looking at it today. And what it says is that the students are expected to know and remember the names of the planets, the order that they fall in, and the distances between them and the sun, and or us and them, and key numbers, right? But they're not taught how they come to these numbers. They're just told the numbers, and you've got to remember them. But what that does then is it does something called it's a psychological process known as imprinting, and it imprints that number on your mind so that further down the line in the education system, you no longer remember or you no longer consider to challenge the authenticity of the 93 million mile sun. For example, you've already got it imprinted in your mind that it is 93 million miles, so you don't even think about challenging it. But on Nathan's show, we've been asking for weeks and weeks and weeks, where does that number come from? And the problem is, if you try and research that 93 million mile sun, you will find numerous different citations from different people from different time periods that have all claimed or have all been credited with catching the distance to the sun. Yet, in history, or if you look back historically, you can look back to see who won the Premier League in 1999, for example, or you can find out that Christopher Columbus discovered America. I mean, we'll ignore the Indians bit, but everybody will find Christopher Columbus. So there's no consensus, or there's no like secure. Not I'm not sure what the stability, or there's no consistency with the citation for where the distance to the sun actually comes from. It shouldn't be the case that one guy will get a guy called Christian Huygens, and then another guy will get somebody else, and a third guy will get another source. But that is what happens. So it's like, well, is it actually the case that we're getting told the truth? Or are we just getting told a deliberately obfuscated story so that we don't find the truth? Or is it that they just can't prove the case? And my intention is to put in a paper into the education establishment asserting that they can't prove their claims to be true. And if they can prove them to be true, we can't validate it or verify it accurately or reliably. So the evidence isn't strong at best. And the overlap with law is that somebody somewhere has got to be responsible for what we're being taught to be true. Now, when I've been looking into it so far, I've found that the Secretary of State for Education does not have a legal duty to tell or to make sure that we are taught the truth. He has a duty, and I've looked into it already, and it says to promote education in England and Wales, but it doesn't say to tell the truth. Now, wouldn't you expect that the education department will be told to make sure that we're getting taught the truth, or at least facts, not necessarily the truth, but at least facts? He's not. The Secretary of Secretary of State for Education is taught, or his main duty is to promote education. So it's like, well, what does he mean by education? And it starts becoming a little bit obscure because you look to like, what is the duty of care for the institution, like the school or the college or the university, and the governors that run it. And you would think that everybody should be collectively responsible, but when I've started looking into it so far, you could argue that actually nobody's responsible for the truth. It seems that everybody's responsible for making sure that little Billy doesn't get his head kicked in or head flushed down the toilet, but nobody's actually responsible for teaching us anything that's considered to be fact or truth. And I find that bizarre. Now, I've only scratched the surface in the last couple of days while I've been looking into this, but you would expect the legal system to make sure that we're being taught facts and truths. But when I'm looking into it so far, nobody seems to be getting told that we should be getting taught the truth. So the question then becomes, well, if the assertion is that the sun's, for example, 93 million miles away, and it's not that easy to work out that it's actually true, does that mean that it's false, or does it just mean that it's not necessarily true? So my argument's going to be that they can't prove their assertions are true in three, four, five, six different ways. I haven't worked out precisely what I'm going to do yet, but I'm going to say that they can't prove that their assertions of the solar system are actually true. And if they are actually true, they've buried it that far that a bloke that's 38 that's not stupid can't actually find a reliable, credible citation for something as simple as the sun. We all know that 93 million miles, but you try it yourself. You try and find out who was it, when did they do it, and by what method. You just can't find it. And if you can find it,
excuse me, Andy, supposedly it was Maximilian Hell, a Jesuit, in 1765, through a transit of Venus with like 8 other astronomers, around the world in different locations. But we're talking about that situation here in Blockbuster a couple of months ago, and officially, the last papers, the last calculations was provided by Maximilian Hell, and even at that time he took like 1 year delay to deliver the calculation. So he was accused by their own colleagues to be a fraud. But that was
Well,
the guy
it, it,
responsible for
well,
that measurement.
if you
And
can
you,
drop me a link for
Yeah,
that,
of course.
because I'm going
And
to use that, because that's a new name to me. I've not come across that name. I've come across
yeah,
Christian
yeah,
religions.
I can, yeah, I can
But,
provide you a
my
link.
point
And
is, if we all go on Google and type in who discovered America, right? Let's just forget about the Indians thing and whether or not that's true. We'll all find that same one name. But why is it that none of us seem to? We do not find the same name or process or date for who worked out the distance to the sun. That shouldn't be the case. If this is a fact, we should all know it, right?
you to
no,
know.
and the problem with that is that and that is why I talking about that situation here in Blockbuster, because supposedly with that measurement of the sun is created the whole, quote unquote metric system of our solar system. So
Yeah.
if that is wrong, we don't have any clue of the distance, of the real distance. And the other issue is that they create the measurement through the transit of Venus, assuming at that time that the Venus has the same size of the Earth, and the calculation was made assuming the curved horizon.
Yes. That's
So,
the key point. If you
yeah,
assume the curve, then it
exactly.
does one thing. But this is where it gets really interesting, right? Because the ballers all say things like, well, you don't have any peer reviewed papers. And that's because if anybody tried to put in a peer reviewed paper in science journals claiming that the Earth's not a sphere, right, that's not going to go down very well. Let's be honest. It's probably not even going to get published, because we all know that what's going to happen. But my peers, aside from everybody within Flat Earth, because you guys, we're all peers, we are our peers, right? But we're not considered credible. But my peers, in everything I was taught, are actually the legal guys. So I've got barristers, solicitors, lawyers that but these are all people that are in a different section of society. And I believe, and I'm happy to say that they are beyond the sciences, because science is subject to the law, and the people that implement the law is obviously the lawyers, the barristers, the solicitors, whatever. But my point is that the peers that will be reviewing my work are solicitors, barristers, and high up qualified people that are more qualified than me. And I would assert and argue that they are more qualified than science, notwithstanding the fact that science is one of probably the most misused word out there, because actually that which is called science by ballers is actually technology. It's not science at all. There's a very specific and narrow meaning of the word science. And everything that we're taught to do with the solar system comes under the blanket, the description of science. But if you look at the definition of science, it isn't matching the definition. So it's not actually science, it's something else. Who cares what it is? It's not science.
Anti-science.
Yeah, pseudoscience, nonsense, technology, who cares what it is, but it's not actually science, but they all tout it as science, and it makes it sound credible when they do. But the reality is, everybody knows that whatever's going on in this world, it's not a sphere the size they're telling us, right? Could be a sphere, but it's much bigger, or whatever. It's hyperbole. It's conjecture. You can discuss or whatever. But point is, it's not a sphere the size they're telling us, and they can't prove it. Otherwise, we would not even exist. So what I want to do is I want to do this dissertation in a university in England, one of the best education institutions in the world, or reputable in the world. I want to get it back out the other side, and I want them to pass it. And I can write it well enough to be able to pass it. But my biggest problem is that my missus she won't let me do it from the financial side of it, because there is a real risk. And the risk is that because I'm going to do it balanced delicately, that I'm not going to go in there saying the Earth's flat. But what I am going to say is that these guys can't prove their assertions are true. And therefore, there is a question to be asked about who's responsible for that. Is it the Secretary of State for Transport? Is it the universities? Or is it even the teachers? Now, obviously, most teachers are not going to be actually